where a lot of these sophisticated hackers are gaining access are through individuals in the first place. So they're social engineering, they're figuring out how to manipulate an individual to get into an account. So in many cases, adding of that layer of identity theft protection can actually further secure your security posture as an entity.
Okay.
So the individual is the weakest link of all breach.
And so does it tend to be local, like at I go to a restaurant or a local little shop, or is it more like I get like a scam email or a scam phone call or something like that? That's not a personal violation, but more through my personal electronics.
Yeah, as an individual, you're going to notice it the most through phishing emails and stuff like that.
Okay, I think we all get those.
Yeah, and it's going to get more often. It's going to occur more often, I should say, and they're getting much better at doing it. So in the past, you'd get an email that says, whatever it says, this is my resume, but it's all spelled wrong, and it's from some other country, and it's pretty obvious that the person on the other end doesn't really know what they're doing, not very sophisticated, but they're much better at it now.
So this is a modern version of like the Nigerian prince scam, where
but they're much better at it.
Much better at it.
One of the largest issues that we see every year is tax fraud. And so what is that? People are basically filing taxes on your behalf.
But isn't that a good thing? Then they just pay the taxes?
Well, it depends if you get tax refunds.
Obviously, I'm being fresh.
Obviously, yes.
So they do the tax returns so that they get some type of refund or credit from the government, and then they...
Yeah, and then when you go actually try to file your taxes, they're already done.
Okay. That seems to be something that's terrible to experience, plus probably hard to unwind, I would imagine, because you're dealing with the IRS, which is never a fun experience.
Never.
So this is a silly question, I imagine, but who needs to be concerned? I imagine the answer is everybody, right?
Yes. So everybody has to be concerned, and it's not just because of EQUIFAX. EQUIFAX just brought it to the forefront, right?
Yes.
So if you look at the information, the Social Security, the date of birth, the full name, the email address, the address itself, think about how many times you've put that information on an application for pretty much anything, even for your children. They're going to camp and you have to put their Social Security number on the form, right? So if you look at all that information is everywhere. Now think about if you were to try and break into my Gmail account, you wouldn't be able to do it even if you had the password, because they have two-factor authentication where if you tried on your computer, you had my information, they would send me a text and say, put in this code now. And you can't do it. So my whole point in saying that is the information that people need to steal your identity is out there and it's everywhere. So it would be easier for me to find information about your identity than to break into your Gmail account.
So this really just highlights the problem for Americans because of the newsworthiness of it. Absolutely. But it didn't really make the problem that much worse, realistically. What we're going to talk about in terms of tips we should have been doing beforehand, but the EQUIFAX will probably get people to act. I know from my clients I've gotten numerous phone calls and numerous emails, and it's not even really my business, but people are just worried, concerned, rattled a little bit about this. So let's talk about what people should do. Educate me first off, Brian. What's the difference between ID monitoring versus credit monitoring? And as I'm saying that question, I'm thinking there's that commercial with the security guard in the bank.
Yeah.
I imagine that commercial is talking about that a little bit, right?
Yes.
So what is the difference between ID monitoring versus credit monitoring?
So first, they're both important and they're both valuable. Credit monitoring is an important way to monitor your credit and people trying to extend credit, either you trying to extend credit or somebody trying to extend credit on your behalf. So initially the way it was designed was to alert you as the consumer of errors on your credit report and then be able to dispute them and then move on from there and keep up to date on your own credit.
Okay.
Right? And so the benefit on the monitoring side in terms of somebody stealing your identity is that you'd be able to be notified if somebody tried to extend credit in your name. Okay. So for my instance, when somebody took my identity and bought those cell phones, they wouldn't have been able to do it if I had credit monitoring on. Mm-hmm. So what happened was my credit monitoring, as part of the Anthem breach, had ended. And so that speaks to the patience of some of these actors, right? So they'll wait. They know what the rules are. They know what the laws are, and they'll wait. And they know that lazy people like me will not extend.
I'm in that category too.
Right? So they're not going to extend the coverage. So they waited, and then they took advantage of it after. So, and then if you look at identity monitoring, there's a whole slew of things you can talk about with identity monitoring, but it's designed to alert customers and consumers of unauthorized activity as early as possible in the identity theft game. And they can do that through a whole host of different sites and monitoring, I say sites, but information resources. Okay. So they monitor, for example, they'll monitor the underground web, the dark web, they call it. And so what they do is they're looking and scouring that market for people trying to sell or trade your information. So what'll happen is, so like in the EQUIFAX breach, we'll go back to it for a second, is that they have all this information now, and now they need to do something with it to capitalize on it, and likely what they're going to do is sell it. So they're going to sell it on the black market, and then people are going to perpetrate crime with it.
Okay.
That's essentially.
So regardless of whether your information was breached with EQUIFAX, what are a couple of things that are sensible, relatively easy, low-cost ways to provide you and your family more protection? What should I do? So, by the way, I've done nothing. I need to do something. So tell me what I should do.
Yeah, well, the reality is what happens is most people don't do anything until they need to, right? So that's the biggest problem. But in light of that, there's many companies that if you subscribe to their service, will do a look back for you and help you with any problems in the past. Mm-hmm. So the first thing, though, more than anything, is education, awareness. Know what's going on. Like, just be aware. Have a little common sense in where you're putting information. And I say that to myself as well. I'm not saying that as a blanket statement for everyone. It's a reality that you are in charge of your own identity. You have information that people will manipulate and use to their own advantage. So you have to be careful of what you're doing with that information. Okay. So your behavior matters.
So common sense examples, if somebody calls you up and asks for your social security number, you shouldn't give it over the phone.
No.
If you get a pop-up on your computer and you don't know the source of that, you shouldn't put in private information. Those are like two easy examples,
things,
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Simple thing. Another one would be, like we were talking about phishing emails before, like if you ever have a question about an email you're not sure, don't click on it.
Like, don't open the attachment.
Don't open the attachment. Don't click on the link. Forward it to your IT guy and say, just checking, let me know what you think. One easy thing to do is if there is a link in an email and you hover over it instead of click it, it'll actually show you the real address. So instead of actually clicking on it, just hover your mouse over it. It'll show you the actual address, the real.
So number one is be informed, use common sense protections with your information. Mm-hmm. What would be number two?
Passwords. Definitely passwords. You have to have strong passwords. As simple as it gets, you have to have strong passwords, right? So I've done it. I'm certain that other people have done it, where they use the same password for everything. Mm-hmm. And so if Yahoo's breach, your password for Yahoo is the same as your bank account,
right?
They're going to start checking these things. They have bots that actually go out and do this for them. And so
what's a bot? So you're like a computer algorithms that are...
Computer algorithm that'll take bits of information from LinkedIn. They'll take bits of information from Facebook. They'll take bits of information from the Yahoo breach, and they'll aggregate all this information and then start putting it together and trying to find.
So then, a more secure password are things like include numbers and what's the other thing, like parentheses or an exclamation point, to have capital as well as lowercase letters, things like that. Is it important not to have like your kid's name or your date of birth?
Yes.
I imagine that's sensible too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything that makes it super easy for you to remember is also relatively easy for them to figure out, if that makes sense.
Okay. And it's not like there's somebody someplace that's looking at your stuff. They're using computers, right?
Yes.
Fast working computers to cycle through all of these different versions trying to...
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't be so scary if it was like so-and-so is sitting in some faraway place punching in what they think mine is.
Right.
But they're using computers, so they go through monster numbers all the time, right?
Absolutely.
So number 2 is good passwords. Do you think Americans generally do a good job with that or not so much?
No.
It's a huge area of improvement.
Yeah, and so the other part of it is too, if you walk into most offices, you'll walk in and you'll see, they'll say I have a good password, but the password's on a sticky note on their monitor. So it's not just having a good password, but not placing it out in the open or somewhere in your desk, or just know your password.
Okay.
And don't write it down.
All right.
On your desk.
What would be number 3 on your list?
So in terms of an office environment, shredding is huge. Putting things away is a huge thing that most companies are not very good at. And so as an individual, you want to make sure that you're working with companies and professionals that you don't walk into their office and you see somebody else's information on the desk. You want to know that when you leave, your information is off your desk. So that's a pretty simple thing that you want to make sure that you're working with people that are cognizant of and take care of your information.
Sure.
Because as I said before, most breaches and most information is taken because of human error or something somebody does intentionally, but not through breach necessarily.
Okay. So tell me the 3 again. The first one was common sense, protect your information, be aware. Number 2 is passwords. Number 3 is in an office environment, protect the information. And deal with professionals and businesses that have the awareness to protect information. I know in my industry, Brian, we're very regulated. We deal with lots of private information, including people's social security numbers, dates of birth, account numbers, net worth. We tend to have access to their tax returns, their investment accounts. So we have to be very careful. There's a lot of regulations around it. There's a lot of standards around it. But a lot of it, to your point, is also just common sense, safe precautions. So that's good.
I'll just reiterate that because I've had a number of prospects that have been on the fence until something's happened, and every time something's happened, it's human error. It hasn't been from a breach. It hasn't been from somebody manipulating their computer systems or anything like that. It's been somebody individually clicking on a phishing email or mishandling people's information by sending something out the wrong way.
Okay. Good. So can you explain to me what it is when you freeze your credit? And explain what that is and maybe describe whether that's a helpful tool or not.
Yeah, so freezing your credit is basically if somebody tries to pull credit on you or extend credit on you, they won't be able to unless you authorize that and you talk to the credit agency.
So you go to the credit agency and say, I don't want any accounts opened up.
Correct.
And then there's an extra precaution so that if someone in Washington, I think you said your personal breach happened in Washington State?
Yes.
So if somebody walks in AT&T in Washington State, tries to open up credit, then AT&T wouldn't be able to access your credit profile, and you probably... that person in Washington probably wouldn't be able to get credit because it's frozen and AT&T can't see anything.
Correct.
Is that
Yep.
am I explaining that?
Yeah,
well?
so they wouldn't be able to extend credit to anybody without my authorization personally.
Okay.
So I would have to physically or on the phone call them and tell Equifax, TransUnion, or Experian that to lift the freeze, this is me, and then put it back on.
How about risk to minor children? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the risk with minor children, the major risk is that their credit profile or them as an identity, personal identifiable information, them as a person in the world of credit.